Good morning and welcome to Motivational Mornings, the podcast that gets you going before you get going. Good morning and welcome to Motivational Mornings. My name is Vivi, and as always, I'm here with my co-host Ryan. Today's book that we'll be discussing is Trillion Dollar Coach by Bill Campbell. Now, Bill Campbell was a coach and arguably one of the first coaches of all time. But in the sense of business coaching, you don't really hear of business coaching too often. You often hear of managers and such. However, I think Bill Campbell and his story of how he valued companies up to $1 trillion, they say, kind of illustrates the point of why you need a coach and why it's super important. Now, a little bit about Bill. He was kind of a scrawny, small guy, and he went to Columbia back in the I think 60s or 70s, and he played football there, but he was not nearly the biggest guy there. However, he was the team captain and did really, really well. And after that, he actually ended up coaching for a while and wasn't too successful at that. But then he got into the business world and became super successful, came down to Silicon Valley, and then he led companies like Google, Twitter, all these huge companies that we all know and love today. So the first point I have for this book is that coaching is no longer a specialty. You can't be a good manager these days without being a good coach. You need to create a community of respect, feedback, and trust. And that all happens through good coaching as opposed to being a good manager. Likewise, Bill felt that leadership is something that evolved from management excellence. You can't just become a good coach overnight. You have to have management excellence. It's how you bring people around and make them flourish in their environment. Not by being a dictator or telling them what the hell to do, but it's by making sure that they feel valued when they are in the room with you. Listen and pay attention is one of the things Bill strived for, what makes a great manager a good coach. And Harvard business professor Linda Hill, who studies management, also agrees with this point. And to add onto what Linda said, she also mentioned in the Harvard Business Review that being a dictator doesn't work. She wrote in 2007. She said that new managers soon learn that when direct commands are given, they don't necessarily respond. In fact, the more talented the subordinate or the person is, the less likely they are to follow orders. A manager's credibility only as the manager establishes credibility with subordinates, peers, and superiors by making sure that they listen to them and by suggesting things and not by ordering things around. Also, Linda added that your title makes you a manager, however, your people make you a leader or a coach.
One point in the book that I found interesting, and I think this kind of builds on your point, Vivi, is Bill's idea of having people open up and his focus on building relationships. So one interesting thing Bill would do every single meeting is he would start it off with a trip report. And what this trip report was is he would go around the room and everyone would have to give a report on their latest weekend or their latest trip. So what was the point of this? Well, a few things. One, it would help lighten up the mood. And then two, you would get to know each and every person on a more individual basis and build more real relationships. And what they found was having a fun work environment correlated with higher work performance because people were more comfortable working with each other and were able to trust each other. They're able to deal with problems on a more effective basis. They would take things less personally and instead would help and team up with each other and focus on the issues at hand instead. When Bill's teams were focusing on whatever issues came up at the companies, Bill had another rule, and this was the rule of principles. So this is very similar to Ray Dalio's principles. You'll see we did an episode on Ray Dalio's book, Principles, in episode 51. So if you guys want to take a look at that, you can review the episode. Or if you want to pick up a copy of Ray Dalio's book, you can always go to audibletrial.com/motivational mornings to get a 30-day free trial of Audible, where you can choose any audiobook of your choice. And if you don't like the service, feel free to cancel within 30 days and they won't charge you. So back to the principles. So Ray Dalio's principles and Bill Campbell's principle was that you have to know your own principles in order to make difficult decisions. So how does this work? Well, one example that the book gave was when Tell.me, a software company, was in talks to be bought out by Microsoft. And they were going back and forth, and they ended up making a deal. But then another company, a lesser known company, came in and offered Tell.me more money to be bought out. So this is a difficult decision to make. Do you honor Microsoft's deal, or do you go with this new company and spurn Microsoft and get more money? And they would have all these meetings, and there'd be two sides, and they go back and forth because it was a very difficult decision to make. But the way they solved this issue was they went and led with their principles. So one of their principles was integrity. And that meant honoring their deal with Microsoft. So that made it so much easier. What are our principles? If it's integrity, you know which one's the better choice. So I think this is a great example of know your own principles, know what they are and know them well. And whenever difficult decisions come up in life, instead of going through all the pros and cons, it might be better go through a list of principles and which option aligns with these principles.
And to add to your point, Ryan, on how when they're more personable with each other, that they make actually better team members and better employees and employers, Google ran a study to find out if this was actually true on a scientific level. And they did find that firms that improve their management practices, and that all entailed what you were talking about, being a better team member and everything, if they improve their practices by one standard deviation above the mean, they can raise their market value per employee by $18,000 per year, which is pretty kind of crazy if you think about it. And Google report confirmed this also again in 2008. So the first study was in 1999, and then the second one was in 2008. And they also added that those teams who had these great management practices also had a lower turnover and a higher productivity. Another idea that we kind of touched obviously previously in a previous episode was the idea of meritocracy, and it's again mentioned in Trillion Dollar Coach. So the idea of meritocracy, for those of you who haven't heard the previous episode on Ray Dalio's principles, is that when governing a company, some people like Bill Campbell and Ray Dalio think that an idea of meritocracy, which is that the best idea governs where the company heads to, and that can be given by anyone in the company, from a janitor to a CEO, that's the best way in terms of picking a direction which to go as a company. And another point that I found is interesting on a side note is that Bill said, talking about letting people go and firing people, which I don't think many people talk about these days. So I was quite interested to hear his topic on that. Bill said that letting people go was a failure of management. So when that was done, they ought to ensure that the person that was being let go was done so in the best way for them as possible as it possibly can be. For example, if you're about to let somebody go, make them save their face. Don't embarrass them. Maybe even try to align another job for them in the future that might be a better fit, because obviously it wasn't a good fit for your company. And so if someone leaves your company in a better mood and you gave them the job already, then what a great recommendation they can give to other people in the future. And then one of the few really good takeaways I found was Bill mentioned his 4 characteristics for hiring someone on their team. Those 4 characteristics are: the person has to be smart, in the sense of catching on quickly and making connections. Like you can pick up something quick and talk about it and understand it. Second thing is person has to work hard. So they have to have the diligence and perseverance to work hard. The third one is person has to have integrity. So they have to have really high integrity. And the last one is the person needs to have grit, which is kind of a hard thing to measure, but he says that they need to be able to get knocked down and to get back up with perseverance. And so asking those questions in interview situations he found was super important. And I suppose the last thing that I have to mention is one of the most important things for a company and any small business. I feel like Bill's peer feedback survey that he used for years at Google, which then gave people at the company feedback on how they were doing, and he'd use it quarterly. He said the results they provided were very, very informing in their eyes of their peers, and most importantly, the people who worked there at the company. And this peer feedback survey has 4 parts. 1, job performance. 2, relationship with peer groups. 3, management and leadership. And then number 4 is innovation. And what we've also done for you guys is made a PDF available peer feedback survey, quarterly one for your potential company, or you can use it and personally any kind of way you'd like. It'll be available on the show notes for this episode, and also probably on our website as well, so you can check that out.
I'm super excited for this peer feedback survey. So guys, check it out, and hopefully we'll have even more content to you guys coming up the pipeline. So going back to the book, I want to talk about Bill's idea of free form listening. And some other people call it active listening. And this is such a big thing because I've noticed it's a trend. It seems like every book we do, this topic comes up again and again and again. And every author and every person is saying listening is so important. So I just want to stress it here again, guys. Free form listening or active listening is when you're asking questions to find out more information. It's so common. I know I find myself doing this as well. When someone's speaking, I'm just thinking about my reply. I'm thinking about what I'm going to say to them, but while they're still going through their points. So that's not effective. That doesn't make sense, because how will I be able to have the proper response, or how will I know what I want to say when they're not even done speaking? So I think it's a difficult thing to do well, but it's so important that next time you're listening to someone, really try. Don't think about your rebuttal or how you're going to reply. Think about questions to ask them to find out more information, to understand their side better. So Bill Campbell was also big on people. Whenever there's an issue, he wouldn't talk about how to solve the problem. He would talk about, can your team solve the problem? Is your team have the amount of resources, the knowledge to be able to figure out the solution to whatever problem that was being discussed? This is big. Bet on people. And I think even if we're running a business, we want to hire, the brightest, best people, like Vivi was saying, with the 4 characteristics. But even when we're having our own personal team, our friends, who we surround ourselves with, we want to bet on people. Are we surrounding ourselves with the best team, so when opportunities or problems arise, that we have the correct team in place to figure it out? And that wraps up today's episode of Motivational Mornings. Thanks for listening, guys. Remember, check out our peer feedback review survey. When you guys get a chance, you'll find more information about it in the show notes. And also, if you guys are interested and want to find out more information about this book, feel free to go to audibletrial.com/motivational mornings to get a free 30-day trial of Audible and give it a try. If you don't like it out, feel free to cancel. But if you do, it's a great way to get audiobooks every month. Thanks for listening, guys. Have a great day.